So hands up, any of you who are getting a bit hungry after all these high-energy, inspiring performances? So few of you. Now hands up anyone who saved some of your lunch for later. No one. Big mistake if you're in prison. You won't get to eat again until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, confined to this your cell, not much bigger than this stage, a room that was built for 20 men, but which you share with up to 40 others using one open toilet for 23 hours of every day. But being hungry here, and the maggots you occasionally find in the meals you do get, these are the least of your problems. This is the most dangerous prison in South Africa. And these men around you are not just any men. You, sir, in the purple t-shirt, you shot 2 people in a gang fight and killed a child in the crossfire. You, sir, in the stripy shirt, you went on a drunken joyride and beat to death 3 hitchhikers for the color of their skin. And you, sir, in the grey t-shirt, you're a kind of celebrity here in the group because you murdered in a botched robbery the former wife of former President F.W. de Klerk, who back in 1994 handed over the country to Nelson Mandela and shared the Nobel Peace Prize with him for bringing in the new South Africa. But 8 years on, in 2002, here in Brunflame Maximum Security, there is little sign of that new South Africa. So every morning you wake hungry but grateful that you are not one of those prisoners raped or murdered in your beds. Now, if I were to ask you 3 and other prisoners like you in your daily struggle for survival, how interested are you in making the world a better place? You're probably going to say to me, not much. But you, sir, you in the white shirt, you have a different answer to that question. You've just learned about AIDS. You've learned how it's killing the men around you in this prison, how it's killing the men, women, and children in your community. All while the president, Thabo Mbeki, denies the problem. Now, you're in here for an armed robbery, which you'd committed to raise money in the fight against apartheid. And yet here you are, languishing in this prison, when around you in the country, so much of the freedom you fought for hasn't come. But now in AIDS, at last, you see an opportunity to do something. So, to cut a long and heartbreaking story short, you talk to the men around you, you decide you want to help AIDS orphans, and you find a prison social worker who will find you an orphan so badly off that he's going to say yes to an offer of help from a bunch of maximum security prisoners. But even you are pretty shocked when the orphan boy arrives for his first visit. He's 11, he's skeletal, he looks about 8. His body is covered in the sores of AIDS. He also has spina bifida. You, meanwhile, have no money, you have almost no rights, and yet you find a way to make him clothes, then to grow him food, and eventually even to grant him his lifelong dream to fly. This boy, Thabang, is the first of many orphans whose lives were changed by these prisoners and others like them, who created an extraordinary organization called the Group of Hope. And 10 years on, against all the odds, this Group of Hope has come to change the lives of hundreds of kids and to change the perceptions of thousands of people about prisoners' own capacity to change themselves. I've been privileged enough to follow the story closely, first through writing about them, and more recently through an organization called Brothers for All, which we founded to help the men, when they're released, continue their amazing work in their communities. Now, I have to confess that the first time I walked into this cold, brutal prison, I was pretty alarmed, and I was pretty disconcerted when I met with a group of burly murderers dressed in orange who greeted me with big hugs. But over the years, I've come to admire and trust and like these men. Even so, I'd always thought of prison as essentially a parallel universe, one with little direct relevance to the universe the tech-rich, the highly educated, the fast-paced, the big opportunity universe that we all inhabit here. But then in 2013, Nelson Mandela died. And for weeks on the radio, South Africans, wealthy and poor, called in to share their Mandela moments, these amazing stories of how years after meeting them, he would remember their name, their child's ambition, their mother's ill health. And the talk show hosts invariably summed this up by saying things like, "What an amazing politician's mind he had." And one of the prisoners listening to this got really frustrated. He said, "That's not politician's mind." He said, "That's prison mind." Because when you're in prison, he explained, you learn to remember everything about other people. Because other people are all you have. Your ability to get anything done relies entirely on your ability to persuade and influence others. Which, of course, is relevant not only if you're a prisoner, but to anyone trying to do anything great. So I put it to these men of the group of hope, these men who from the confines of their isolated cells have led more change than most of us do from the platforms of our connected cities. What is it that we should be learning from you about leadership? And these are the 3 lessons they shared. The first is to put your attitude on trial. You want to get anything done in prison. The obvious thing you bump up against are the rules. The less obvious, but often more important thing, is how absolutely furious you get with the people you have to live with day in and day out. The guy who wakes you up at 3 in the morning with his ablutions. The guy who sits on your bed and crumples your blanket. Or the man you can't even look in the eye because of the color of his skin. But then, as one of the prisoners said to me, if you're in prison and you have a problem with someone, you might be stuck with that problem for the next 10 years. You can't move them to another department. You can't fire them and hire someone more appropriate. If you want to work with them, your only option is to change what you think about them. In this picture, 2nd row from the back, 3rd from the right, is Azukile Kopi, the man who originally proposed the project to help AIDS sufferers. Azukile had spent a lifetime fighting against the injustices of a white government. He loathed white people. But he also knew that the only person in this desperate prison who would possibly support a project as frankly insane as prisoners adopting orphans was this gentle visionary and white social worker called Jacobus Panskro. So Azukile deconstructed a lifetime of anger, and he went to this man and he asked for help. This was the first of just countless times that these members of the group of hope would have to fight similar internal battles with their own prejudice to take the first step in getting anything worthwhile done. The second lesson, ruthlessly test for commitment. You start a project like this, and then maintaining discipline and filtering for the right people to work with children becomes incredibly hard. The group of hope did all sorts of the right things. They created a constitution which banned drugs and swearing and gangs. They had a vision statement, they had a mission statement, they wrote up their values, they had disciplinary meetings. And to their credit, there has never been an incident with the children. But even so, over the years, from time to time, some of the best men, including some of the founders, broke the rules and had to leave the group. Until they came up with a brilliant insight involving the simple strip of waste paper, which, if you roll up, thick end first, makes a bead. And the prisoners had been rolling these beads and making them into jewelry like this to sell and raise money for the children's school fees, for their textbooks, for their clothes and food. But the project had always been optional. The insight was to make it mandatory. Now, many of the men protested furiously. Rolling beads is painstaking and womanly work. And the others stood firm. They said, "We don't care how good you are at making speeches. If you care about these children, you will roll beads with everyone else to show you care. And if we have a big order and a deadline, you will sit up late into the night and roll these beads until your fingers ache and your eyes water because you care." And some of the men left the group, but that group has become infinitely stronger without them, because now, if you're only there to be seen as a leader, if you don't care enough about the shared purpose to share their struggle, there's nowhere for you to hide. The third and final lesson is to mobilize others with radical acts of generosity. Last year, in the run-up to Nelson Mandela Day, the small group of 20 men decide they want to honor his memory by giving food to very poor homes for disabled children. But the only food they have to give is their own, which doesn't add up to much. So this is what they do. They walk from cell to cell, talking to 500 mostly unrehabilitated, mostly unrepentant, murderers, fraudsters, robbers, and rapists. And this is what they say to them. They say, "We have committed to giving up our breakfast bread 3 times a week for 3 months to help disabled children." And they ask them, "Will you join us?" And of these 500 men, more than 300 said yes and committed to giving up their own breakfast bread 3 times a week for 3 months for disabled children. Time and again, this group has shown that if you offer the spark of your own generosity, combined with the promise of the sheer power you feel when you help another person, you can reach into the darkest places. You can reach and touch the most cynical hearts. This is an image of the prisoners delivering the bread themselves to the orphans, so impressed with the prison authorities that they allowed them out to do this. There are many more fascinating lessons from prison, but I think all of them share a common principle, which is most eloquently put by a brilliant friend of mine from the tech world called Tom Chi. Now, Tom describes himself as anti-nouns and pro-verbs. Because nouns, he says, limit us, whereas verbs free us. And of course, in prison, you cannot lead because of who you are, or what you have, or what you can buy, or because you're an Oxford graduate, or because you're a Cambridge graduate, or because of any of the many useful nouns that we share in this room. You can only lead by doing extraordinary things, and so persuading others to do extraordinary things. Like the extraordinary actions of a man called Sishle Shabalala, who became the first person to join our pilot program to teach prisoners and ex-offenders how to code. Now, Sishle was warned that it was probably going to take him at least 1 year to really master one language. And he said, "No, that's not good enough. Not if I'm going to inspire others like me to follow. Not if we're really going to make a difference to people's lives." So Sishle ignored all the experts, and this poorly educated township man who'd been locked away and disconnected in a prison for the last 10 years sat down at a computer and taught himself how to code in 3 languages in 6 weeks. Now, I don't know if Nelson Mandela was born with a politician's gift for remembering what moves people, or if this was a skill forged in 27 years as a prisoner. But I do know that prisons, these places of so little dignity and so little hope, can offer us so many important lessons in leading change, and particularly in leading change that brings dignity and hope to others. And if we believe Nelson Mandela, this is relevant to all of us who value freedom, whether we're free or not. For as he said, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Thank you.